All right, so we're wrapping up Genesis 1. Now, this is our 7th week in Genesis 1. Okay. What does that tell you? It tells you we didn't come here to play. We came here to study the Word and to examine the Word to its fullest extent, to get the most out of the message. Somebody said to me, well, what does that have to do with the gospel? I said, you can't read the book of Matthew with its 150 references to the Old Testament if you don't know anything about the Old Testament. How can you make sense of anything? How can you make sense of Jesus when he says, I only say what I heard my Father say? Where do you think that's recorded? And so that's why we go to this depth of understanding, because if we build a house and we build the foundation properly, your house is never going to collapse. All right, and I made the commitment, once we make it through the first 5 books, we'll then alternate between books, between the Old Testament and the New Testament, so you get the full view, and we'll be at that point where we'll be ready for the parallel view, almost like an interlineary Bible that gives you the Greek, the Hebrew, and the English, all right, but takes you to a place you've never been because you'll have an understanding that you've never had before. So, the image of God in men and women has been marred by sin, but through faith in Messiah and submission to the work of the Holy Spirit, believers can have the divine nature renewed within them. One day when we see Jesus, all of God's children will share in the glorious image of Messiah. Well, that's got to ask yourself the question, do we see a man sitting on the throne? Or do we see him when he was, after the 40 days, when he came and walked there 40 days, when he stood among them, did they recognize him? He had a body, but then what did he do? He walked through a wall. So will we be like that? All right? Is that what a glorified body means? Is that I have a form, a fit, and a function, but I also have spirit, and I'm all spirit? Will the angels be like that? These are questions that the Bible does not tell us, but it gives us reference points. And says, is God pointing to that? Because he had the ability to walk through. Well, why wouldn't he? Who created matter? All right. So if he created matter, he has authority over matter, as we know. Third, we were created to have dominion over the earth. Adam and Eve were the first regents over God's creation. The heaven, even the heavens, are the Lord's, but the earth he has given to the children of men. But when Adam believed Satan's lie and ate of the forbidden fruit, he lost his kingship, and now sin and death reign over the earth. Now our full dominion is restored when Satan is finally bound for 1,000 years and peace comes to the earth. All right, then the final battle, and Satan is then sent into the lake of fire. But you have been given a spiritual dominion, not a physical dominion. And so in Luke 10:19, Jesus says, I have given you the authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing whatsoever shall harm you. So our battle is not against flesh and blood. Our battle is a spiritual battle, and he just gave us dominion over it. He did not give us dominion over the earth. So you and I can speak to the earthquake. We can speak to the tornado. And the tornado doesn't respond. And we go, well, I thought we had authority. We have to understand the boundaries of the authority of the Edenic covenant. And it was a covenant relationship. God started out with a covenant with Adam and Eve. And he said, I give you dominion and authority. You subdue it. You have authority over it. You have stewardship over it. I give you all power and authority over it. But you cannot eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That was a covenant. Okay? It's an if-then. If you do this, then you lose your privileges. Okay? It's quite a simple proposition. We understand that. If you do this, then these are the consequences. Isn't that what you told your kids? How many of you know if you put your hand on a hot stove, you're going to get burned? Is there anybody in here that does not understand that lesson? No, we understand that lesson. We've been taught that lesson. Most of us have been burned on a hot stove. Okay? We didn't intentionally put our hand there, but we certainly bumped up against it and said, ouch, that hurts. But we didn't act surprised. Well, I wasn't expecting that. I thought it would be nice and cool and comfortable. No, it's red hot. You knew what to expect. When Jesus, the last Adam, referred to in 1 Corinthians 15:45, came to earth, he exercised the dominion that the first Adam had lost. He demonstrated that he had authority over the fish. When does the fish understand what water is? When does a fish appreciate water? Only when he's out of it. There's quite a spiritual lesson there. See, you've grown comfortable in your walk with the Lord until something comes along and bumps you off the road. Then you really appreciate what you had. All right? The fish doesn't appreciate the water. It's born in the water, swims in the water, but it does not appreciate the water until it's taken out of the water. So Jesus demonstrated he had authority over the fish. We'll talk about the fish. We talk about the fish when we're in Israel. We talk about the 153 fish that were caught in the net and what that meant. And so you've got to go to Israel to hear what that means. He had authority over the fowl and the animals. When he died on the cross, he conquered sin and death, so that now grace can reign, and God's people can reign in life through Messiah. One day when he returns, Jesus will restore to his own the dominion that was lost because of Adam. So we can't say to that hurricane, we can't say to the water, be still. We can say it, but the spiritual dominion, okay, is what was restored to us in Luke 10:19. Physical dominion over subduing the earth and power and authority over the earth. Satan is still prince of this earth. Okay? He was not replaced. That authority did not replace him. It gave us dominion over the spirits and the principalities. But over the physical things which we had in the garden, we do not have that. Okay? You plow a field, it's still hard to plow. You dig a hole, it's still hard to dig. Okay? Wasn't that the curse? The ground's going to be hard to work. Okay? Women, isn't there pain in childbirth? Okay? Wasn't that part of the curse? Okay? This was part of breaking the covenant. Okay? You can say all you want while you're getting ready to deliver that child, okay? Pain be gone. How well did that work? Anybody here just had the pain immediately went?
Press the morphine button.
So, yeah, right, yeah, there you go. All right, so pain be gone without drugs. All right, you know, think about the poor lady in the back seat of a taxi cab having a baby. She's screaming, and that poor taxi cab driver doesn't know what to do. You know, I know what I would say. They don't pay me enough for this job. Both Adam and the animal creation were vegetarians until after the flood. Isaiah 11:7 indicates the carnivorous beasts will return to this diet when Jesus returns and establishes his kingdom on earth. This is where the lion lays down with the lamb. This is where the child plays by the serpent's hole, by the viper's soul, the cobra's pit. And there's no harm. There's no enmity. All division is removed. If there is no division, then what is there? Unity. You know, for the last, 2 or 3 weeks, there's been a common message coming out of our program, and that is the restoration of community. But breaking it down to common unity is what community means. It's a common unity. It's what binds us together. Well, we've got a primitive Baptist here, and we've got a Pentecostal over there, and we've got a regular Baptist, POB, plain old Baptist, over here, right? And we've allowed these things to divide us, not unify us. Okay? And you've heard me say this before. The Jewish community is 14 million strong, and they're united around the fact that Jesus is the Messiah. And guess what they do? Every city you ever have gone to has had a Jewish community center. There's a neighborhood which is called the Jewish community. Have you ever thought that it's been that way all along. It's always been that way, that there is a Jewish community. And the word community is always used in its description. The very first thing that's done is to build a sense of community. So, what neighborhoods are we going to move into so that we can then build the synagogue close enough to walk to? We can build the community center and the home for the aged and the hospital to serve the needs of the community. So the best hospitals in the world are like Mount Sinai. You want to go to the best hospital in one of the best hospitals in this country, you go to Mount Sinai Hospital. It's a Jewish hospital. But the Jewish community, a little town like Birmingham, Alabama, 5,000 Jews, has a Jewish community center. And guess what? Everybody can be a member of it. It's open to the public. There's no restriction. But there was always an identifiable Jewish community, even to this day, in every city, large and small. Listen, there was a time up, what's the mountains up north of here? No. Big, go smaller. Now come Alabama. Who said it? Sand Mountain. 300 Jewish families settled in Sand Mountain. Came down from the north, okay, and couldn't make it. But there was a Jewish community center in Sand Mountain. So they wanted to come south. And they came together to try to establish a Jewish community in Sand Mountain. Okay? You can go back and look up the history. Okay? It's very interesting. But we lost that. Until he returned, we don't have it. Fourth, this wonderful Creator deserves our worship, praise, and obedience. When God surveyed his creation, he saw that it was very good. Genesis 1:31. Contrary to what some religions and philosophy teaches, creation is not evil, and it isn't a sin to enjoy the good gifts God shares with us. 1 Timothy 6:17. If God has blessed you with a gift of a beautiful home or a new car, don't apologize. There are a lot of people just say, well, that's my new car. No, rejoice. God provided and God gave you that opportunity to retire, or a gift, or a winnings, or an inheritance, or whatever it is. And we're supposed to enjoy it. Anybody ever wonder why God created man and woman naked? And he kept them naked. And then he blessed them, and he told them to be fruitful and multiply. And he kept them naked. So be fruitful and multiply and enjoy the gifts that he gave him. We've just covered the gifts of intimacy through marriage. If you don't think your marriage, your 40, 30, 40, 50, 60, or 70-year-old marriage is supposed to be intimate all the way till the day you die, then you got to take up an issue with Abraham and Sarah. Because you got a real problem with this 100-year-old guy with this 80-something-year-old woman having a baby boy named Isaac. Okay? I guess they enjoyed an intimate marriage all the way to the end of their days. This was what God designed it for. And we have taken it, we've made it dirty, we've made it filthy, we've diminished it, we've now used it as weapons, we've now used it to destroy marriages, we've now introduced pornography, we've now used things that intimacy, okay? Oh, well, when we were younger, we were just little lovebirds, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. You know what? Men, you worked harder to win your wife's heart than you've worked to keep it. And ladies, you worked harder to win your man's heart than you work to keep it. It should not be so. You should be working harder to keep their heart than you worked to win their heart. You got the prize, now you've got to keep it going. And that requires work. Watch some of the specials we just did on intimacy and love. You say, well, you're standing in the pulpit, you're talking to me about sex. That's right. I'm talking to you about the marital bed. I'm talking to you about intimacy going into the later stages of life. No, ladies, you don't want them to touch you where you're uncomfortable. Your husband doesn't see you like you see you. And your body issues are not his issues with you. He loves you. He thinks you're the most beautiful, the most wonderful, the most perfectly made thing in the world. He can't keep his hands off of you. And you say, oh, that's my muffin top. I don't want him to see my muffin top. Or you ask him to leave the room when you're getting dressed because you don't want him to see. And what he sees is this beautiful, ravishing, gorgeous woman, the one who's won the affections of his heart, and he can't keep his hands off of her. All right? And she rebukes him, or there's a rebuff there because she's not happy with her body. But if he's happy with her body, then what difference does it make? God created us for intimacy and for pleasure. I know this is something you're hearing from the pulpit in a Baptist church, and you're going, this is going on TV. But think about it. Abraham was 100 years old. Okay? There must be something to it, to longevity, to enjoyment, to having children, to replenishing the earth. So creation's not evil. David surveyed God's creation and asked, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? The earth is but a tiny planet orbiting in a vast galaxy, and yet the earth is the Lord's. It's the one planet he's chosen to visit and to redeem. Now, we don't know anything about any of the other planets and what his plans are for them, but we know one thing for sure. He gave us his word, and this is the planet that Jesus is coming back to, and that's good enough for me. What he does with Mars and Pluto and Saturn and all these other names we've given these other places isn't really in my business. Okay, I got my hands full with what we got here. The heavenly creatures before God's throne praise him for creation, and so should we. Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Your body parts do not fall off. That means they all have a form, a function, and a fit, and they're for a reason. And if they're still working, you're supposed to be using them. It's how God created you. Otherwise, why did he waste it on you? It's a gift. It's a gift that's supposed to be used. How many of you in your homes have in a closet every gift you were given, and they're all in there unopened? Hey, thanks for the gift. I'm sure I could use it. Throw it in the closet, close the door. This is how we handle what God created us. Thanks for the gift. I'm now going to cover it up. I'm going to throw it away. I'm going to use it. I'm not going to use it. God gave us all of this for a reason. When we bow at meals to thank him for the food he provides, when we see the sunshine and the rain provided at no expense to us, when we watch the progress of the seasons, we should lift our hearts to praise the Creator for his faithfulness and generosity. Finally, we must be good stewards of creation. This means we should respect our fellow human beings who are also made in the image of God. What does God look like? Look around you. God's tall, God's short, God's fat, God's thin. He's bald, he's got long hair, he's got short hair, he's got a beard. He's got it all. And who are we to discriminate against one of God's creation? Which person breathing on this earth, walking on two legs, is not created in the image of God? And yet we decide which one's the better race, or which one's, and we do it in church. I've told people before, if Jesus walked through that back door right now with dirty feet and a raggedy robe and a matted beard and long hair and Middle Eastern features, how far would he get before somebody said something to him? If anybody would say something to him. I don't think we would recognize him if he walked in the door. And yet Paul tells us, be kind to everybody because you just might be entertaining an angel. Where are we disconnecting with how we're supposed to live? I don't know if any of you saw the interview with the rabbi, the senior rabbi from the largest Reformed synagogue in the country, I think maybe the largest in the world. Rabbi Steve Leader was on with me on the show yesterday. Rabbi Steve Leader is not a believer, but he broke his spine in a car accident, went through horrible pain, got addicted to opioids through that process and had to work through all that suffering, and then when he came out the other side of it, was back in the pulpit after 2 years of rehabilitation. He wrote a book on suffering and how God will use it. Jason, do you remember the final words he said to me? He said, we're supposed to live a life which brings glory to God and Christ. His words, not mine. And he pointed into the camera and he said, you're the real deal. He had just spent 1 hour with a Messianic rabbi talking about God's redemptive power in our suffering and how God wants to use our suffering for good, and that if we go through a terrible trial, we're overcomers by the word of our testimony. You can't have a testimony unless you've been through something. If you're, what was his name, Tiny Tim, if you're just living life tiptoeing through the tulips, you don't have much of a testimony, do you? But how God saw you through this difficult time. So this was his testimony to the glory of God, that through his suffering, what he learned about how to appreciate God and how to acknowledge God and who God was to him. And it was different than the first 28 years in the pulpit where he was serving God. Now he was in a relationship with God. It's one of the best interviews I think we've ever done, and this is with a man who's a non-believer. And what's so interesting about it is, we talked before the show where he was from, where I was from. He's from Minneapolis, I'm from Pittsburgh. And I said, yeah, I sat under Rabbi Solomon Freehoff. He said, really? He said, my grandfather has his letters. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His grandfather's in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm talking to him from Beverly Hills, California to Birmingham, Alabama, and he knows my rabbi from 1956. And if you don't think God is the orchestrator, and who do you think I'll run into in Nashville, Tennessee next week but Rabbi Steve Leader, who will be there giving interviews about his new book, and I can guarantee you we'll walk across the room and give each other a big hug and a brotherly kiss on the cheek, and people will look at us and they'll say, isn't that the Messianic rabbi? And isn't that the Reform rabbi? And what do they have to do with each other? It's all about God. It's all about God. So we have to be good stewards. It means appreciating the gifts we have in creation and not wasting or exploiting them. We look into these matters later in greater detail in our further study, but it's worth noting we can't honor the God of creation if we dishonor his creation. You can't honor the Creator and waste the creation. We must accept creation as a gift, guard it as a precious treasure, and invest it for the glory of God. Isaac Watts said it beautifully. I sing the goodness of the Lord that filled the earth with food. He formed the creatures with his word and then pronounced them good. Lord, how thy wonders are displayed where'er I turn my eye. If I survey the ground I tread or gaze upon the sky. Beautiful words. If you know anything about, you know the sermon that I preached on dirt. You can pull it up on the archives. Preached an entire 40 minutes on dirt. The ground, the dirty stuff, the stuff you wipe out from under your fingernails. And if you remember, the foundation of it was that God sent the spies into the promised land, and they came back with a report, and 10 of them said, oh no, we're going to die. And 2 of them said, you remember what they said? The land is good. The dirt is good. Their report was checking out the dirt. Because without good dirt, you can't grow anything. Without good soil of the heart, you can't. And so God had me start giving a sermon on dirt. I laughed about it and I joked about it from the pulpit, and I went out and Googled sermons on dirt. I couldn't find anybody. I called all my friends and said, have you ever preached on dirt? And they said, you mean like smut? I said, no, I'm talking about dirt, like dirt, ground, the dirty ground. They said, no, well, what's the message in that? And I said, well, I'm going to tell you what the message is in that. And that's in that book. And if you haven't read it, I suggest you read it and start with the dirt. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. The result of the sixth day comes with these words, and God saw everything that he had made. Although the focus is on the work of the sixth day, the term everything includes the work of all 6 days. God states, and behold, it was very good. He doesn't merely say it was good, as has been heretofore. Now the word very is added, the first emphasis of the uniqueness of the sixth day. The rabbis say that the adverb very is added to denote that the perfection of the total creation exceeds that of its separate parts. Again, the phrase also applies to the work of all 6 days. So you think of the sum of the parts are usually greater than the whole. But in this case, God's saying the creation of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. If I had just created the sun but not created the moon, we wouldn't have light by night. If I had just created the waters but not the shore, we'd all be fish. If I had only created the animals that walked along the ground but none that flew in the air, we wouldn't have flowers. Because the seed would not be spread and there would be nothing to fertilize. And all of a sudden you begin to break it down and say, wait a minute, I've never really thought about what he created on each day and what the end result of that is and what their form and their fit and their function is. And on the 6th day, when he's finished with it all, he says, now this, all of this is very good. There was evening and there was morning the 6th day. Finally, there is the conclusion of the 6th day. For the first time, there is the definite article, the, before the number. Up to this verse, it simply had been 1 day. The first day. The second day. It's not a 6th day, but the 6th day. This is the only time the definite article is used in this format. It marks the second emphasis on the uniqueness of the 6th day. Well, wait a second, isn't the 7th day? Aren't we all about the Sabbath and the 7th day and the uniqueness of the 7th day? What's all this business about the 6th day? Because this was the end of his work. This was the end of creation. This was the completion of it. The third emphasis of the day's uniqueness is it receives the most detailed description. More is described of what was created on the 6th day than all of the other days. One final note about this 6th day concerns men and women. But first, both were created on the same day as the crowning elements of creation. Genesis 1 does not deal with the order of the creation of male and female, but the emphasis is that he created mankind, both male and female, on the same day. Let us create man in our image. Let us create them, both male and female. He does not separate it at that point. We learn about a separation, but male and female were there, whether or not they were unified or separate. It was not cardinal as opposed to, or ordinal as opposed to first and second. Okay? For this reason, a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and they will become one. Why? Returning back to the original condition. Genesis 1 does not deal with the order of the creation of male and female, but the emphasis he created mankind, both male and female, on the same day. Secondly, both men and women have the image of God, given not only to the man, but also to the woman. We don't ever think about that. That women are created in the image of God the same way as men. We always talk about God in the male form, the male form, the male form, the male form. So what does that mean? That women are second-class citizens? What are you, Archie Bunker? Yes, there is a headship. Thirdly, both men and women were given the mandate of authority over the planet in the Edenic covenant. To be sure there was headship, nevertheless, both Adam and Eve were given the mandate over authority over the planet under the Edenic covenant. It was a covenant he made with them. Not a covenant he made with Adam. It was a covenant he made with Adam and Eve. Therefore, she was an equal part of the covenant relationship. I mentioned many times in the last couple of weeks, our emphasis on the cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And the emphasis is always on the 3 strands. The husband, the wife, and God right there in the middle. Always the emphasis on the 3 strands. And lately I've been saying the emphasis on the cord. You don't maintain that cord. You let that cord sit out in the sun too long, it's going to dry rot and fall apart. You use that cord often enough, the ends are going to fray, and if you don't deal with the ends where they frayed, it's going to come unraveled. So where's the emphasis? Is it on the 3 strands or is it on the cord? If we want a cord to last, I know people that have had ropes for years and years and years and years, their favorite old rope. What do? They tape off the ends, right, so it doesn't come unraveled when it's not being used. If they have nylon, they take a torch to it and they burn the ends until it's nice and hard on the ends so it will not come unraveled. All these things are examples of what we're supposed to be doing in our marriage. We keep commenting about the 3 strands, the 3 strands, the 3 strands, the 3 strands. The emphasis is the cord is not broken if it's made up of these 3 strands. So what winds up happening? Here's the husband, here's the wife, and here's God, and we have 3 strands, and they don't even touch each other. But they're supposed to be so interwoven that they can't be pulled apart because the strength is in the relationship between how they're woven together, a braid. They are braided together. Now, this is not like where my daughter told me to put her hair in a bun, and I took a hot dog bun, and I opened it up, and I put her hair in a bun, and I put 3 rubber bands around it and said, "There, baby, your hair's in a bun." Okay? I have pictures. There's 4 theological implications of the 6 days of creation in the overall context of the book of Genesis. First, the God who created Israel is the same as the God who created the universe. I can't tell you how many churches don't get that. The same God who created Israel created the universe. So if he chose Israel as his beloved, he created it, he can call it what he wants to call it. He created it. He can do with it what he wants. Second theological implication is an emphasis on the sovereignty of the God of creation. Everything that exists must be under God's control. Sometimes things happen because of his directive will. Events occur because God decreed them to occur, such as Noah's flood and Sodom and Gomorrah. But sometimes things happen because of God's permissive will. For instance, he did not direct Adam and Eve to sin, but he did permit them or allow them to sin. Either way, everything's under the sovereignty of God, the God of creation. God did not stand there and say, "They did what? I never saw that coming." Or Satan going around and making his visitation to every one of the angels. Word gets back to God and he goes, "What are you talking about? My chief angel is trying to turn people against me? That's unheard of." No, it's part of God's sovereign plan. A third theological implication, the foundation of law, because the earth was created by means of the Word of God. See, God spoke the world into existence through the Word. What's John 1:1 say? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So there was an order, and God created the earth in a specific order. Well, part of the order to that is things we define as the laws of gravity, all right? And the laws of rotation and revolution and all these terms we use to explain to us how the universe operates. God was before all things, and he caused all things to come into being, so there was and is simply no other God to obey. This God laid down specific provisions such as the Edenic covenant. That is a legal and binding agreement. It is a law. And there were consequences for breaking the law. We still suffer those consequences. So, are you under the law? I'm saved by grace, but I am still under God's law. And if you don't understand it that way, then you need to reframe your thinking, because God still is the master of the universe. And there are still things that he says, don't do this or there'll be consequences. Well, that's a law. So I'm saved by grace. I'm not saved by my performance of the law, but am I under the law? You bet you are under the law. You don't think it's a command to love your neighbor as yourself? That's a direct order. The words say, love your neighbor as yourself. I order you to love your neighbor as yourself. I don't give you a choice. Oh, if it's easy, love your neighbor as yourself. Or if it's comfortable, love. No, it's an order. It is a directive. It is a law of the New Testament. Yeah, it takes a lot of grace to love your neighbor as yourself. You bet. But that's a law. That's an order. Bless those who curse you. That is an order. It's not optional. Forgive so that you may be forgiven. So if I withhold forgiveness, God will withhold forgiveness from me. That's what the Word says. That's not according to me, it's according to Him. Isn't that a covenant? That's an if-then. If you don't forgive, I don't forgive, but if you forgive, I forgive. Sounds like it to me. So there was and is simply no other God to obey. The God laid down specific provisions, such as the Edenic covenant. As Genesis and subsequent history continues, there'll be more provisions made, such as the law of Moses. The point is that God is the creator, and the creation is the foundation of the law. The same way that God creates by means of His Word is also by the way by which God communicates His will, as well as the same way by which He spells out human obligations to Him, through the Word. According to God's wrath poured out on those that did not obey Him, and we see the return of the Messiah, and we hope that we will not be here to see God's wrath poured out, but should we be, it will be because of the violation of God's laws. You're watching it happen in America when you're looking at same-sex marriage, and you're looking at transgenderism, and then you're going to look at polygamy, and then you're going to look at there is legislation that's out there that bestiality is to be legalized. If you're going to abide by it's my body and I can make my own decisions over my body, such as aborting a baby, then how can the government not say anything goes? If you can kill the unborn child, I guess you can mate with your mule. I mean, what's good, what's bad? How do we decide? I'll tell you again, the leading cause of death in America is 100% avoidable. 100% preventable. The leading cause of death in America is abortion. It's 100% preventable. Why don't we take that $500 million and give it for heart and cancer and for child cancer, for doing something positive instead of killing babies? A fourth theological implication is God's redemptive work. At the time described in Genesis 1, there is no sin. Hence, there are no clear statements about redemption, but there are some implications of the work of redemption which will be determined and developed later. This is seen in two ways. First, there's the concept of going from darkness to light. While these terms are used in their physical senses, they also have spiritual implications. Jesus is called the light of the world. We are transferred to the kingdom of the light of the Son of God and positive elements of that nature. On the other hand, Satan is the prince of this darkness. Sin is compared to darkness, blackness, and negative elements of that nature. Just as the physical creation moved from darkness to light, even so in the redemptive work of God, we have moved from darkness of sin to the light of salvation. But we did not end our lives when we got saved. I have the hardest time convincing people that your life began. When one life died, a new life began. And the reason why you stick around is because you're to be doing the work, to be the hands and feet. Otherwise, salvation would be the end point, not the starting point. It's the starting point of a new life, a new redeemed life. A second way this redemptive work is seen through the movement from chaos to order. Chaos is a result of sin, of Satan's fall. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and Satan is the angel of this darkness. He likes to fashion himself as a counterfeit angel of light, but in reality, he's the angel of this darkness. Sin brings chaos in the lives of unbelievers and believers as well. God has provided movement from chaos to order. For the unbeliever, he moves from chaos to order when he accepts Jesus as Savior. But I've seen some of you get saved and want to drag and hold on to that past and pull it along, but you don't have to. And if there's anybody in here that struggles with forgiving themselves for something they've done in the past, I'm telling you that's the highest form of pride, putting yourself above the life that was given. If God forgives you and you can't forgive yourself, doesn't that mean you put yourself above God? That's a bitter pill to swallow. And I know some of you struggle with things in your past. But let me assure you, I've gone to the Lord and said, Lord, it's come to my remembrance something I did in 1973. And I hear straight from him, he goes, I have no record of it. I don't know what you're talking about. And maybe it's time you stop trying to remind me of it. Because I've already forgiven it. You want to dredge up your past, I want to perfect your future. We all have a past. Every one of us. It says, none, not one are righteous. You could have been born on the church steps. You could have been raised in the church, gone to every summer camp, every Wednesday night, been in the choir, done everything, and you still have things from your remembrance that you did when you didn't think anybody was watching, or anybody would find out, or when you first left home, or that's the reason you left home, to get away from things that were going on in the home. Genesis chapter 2. Vaykulau hashemayim ve'aretz ve'kol tzedva'am. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. This verse begins with the completion of all work on the sixth day, giving us the basic facts. The second phrase refers to all the host, both the heavens and the earth. The structure used to deal with the seventh day is totally different than that used for the first 6 days. It breaks with that of the 6 days, emphasizing 5 basic things that happened on the seventh day: the finishing, the completion, the cessation, the blessing, and the sanctification. All that took place on the seventh day. Vayikal Elohim bayom hashva'i melakto asher asa vayishbot bayom hashva'i mikol melakto asher asa. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. This verse emphasizes the cessation of creation. God has now finished his creative work, and from this time on the function is no longer creation, but procreation. As God was in the position of having already finished his work, he therefore abstained from work on the seventh day. The Hebrew word shavat means to complete, to cease, or to rest. God rested not in the sense of being tired or needing recuperation, but in the sense of cessation, of having completed or finished his work. The word Shabbatis, used here as a verb, not a noun, and so it is not a proper name for the seventh day. The noun form, Shabbat, will not be used until the book of Exodus, becoming a proper name for the seventh day only in Exodus 16. So it means for all of Genesis, the seventh day was just a day of rest. It wasn't sanctified, it wasn't set apart, it wasn't hallowed, it was just the seventh day. It marked the rest and completion. In this passage, the word is used as a verb, meaning its use here denotes only a concept of cessation and rest. For now, it's only called the seventh day, not the Sabbath day. So we're not given the Sabbath until the Exodus. Notice also that no command here is to observe this day. On this day, God ceased from his creative work. It's just another day in the creation story. It's the day when he stopped because his work was finished. Vavarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i v'kadesh oto kivo Shabbat mikol melakto asher bara Elohim la'asot. How many of you remember the word bara? Create. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. The blessing of the seventh day begins with its sanctification. The Hebrew word for hallowed means to be set apart. How many of you ever gone to a university and walked the hallowed halls? We've used that word. Okay? We are called to be set apart, a people set apart, a royal priesthood. All that has to do with this sanctification. It emphasizes elevation and exaltation and the idea of being lifted above the level of all other days. The reason that God sanctified the seventh day is that God ceased his creative work on that day. It actually reads, because from that day which he created, from that which he made. The first phrase, from the day which he created, uses the word bara, emphasizing something only God can do. And the second phrase, from that which he made, uses the word as a word that can be used of both God and man. Exodus 31:17 states, on the seventh day God rested and was refreshed. So what about the first Sabbath? Genesis 2:1-3. The word Shabbat or Sabbath isn't found in this paragraph, but Moses is writing about the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week. The phrase seventh day is mentioned 3 times in verses 2 and 3. Sabbath comes from a Hebrew word Shabbat that means to cease, to rest, and is related to the Hebrew word for 7. But the Hebrew word for 7 is Sheva, not Shabbat. We need to consider 3 different Sabbaths found in the Bible. The personal Sabbath of the Lord God, verses 1-4. The first Sabbath didn't take place because God was tired from all his creative work, because God doesn't get weary. God set apart the seventh day because his work of creation was finished, and he was pleased and satisfied with what he created. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Tov ma'od. 3 things are distinctive about the seventh day of the creation week. First, there's no mention of evening and morning, suggesting that God's Sabbath rest would have no end. Unfortunately, man's sin interrupted God's rest, and God had to search for Adam and Eve and deal with them. Adam, where are you? Who told you you were naked? Second, there's no record that he blessed any of the other 6 days, but God did bless the seventh day. In blessing it, he made it a blessing. Third, after blessing the seventh day, God sanctified it, which means he set it apart for his own special purposes. Elohim is the God of time as well as the Lord of eternity. It was he who created time and established the rotation of the planets and their orbits around the sun. It was he who marked out the 7-day week and set aside 1 day for himself. Every living thing that God has created lives a day at a time except humans made in God's image. People rush around in the frantic rat race of life, always planning to rest but never seeming to fulfill their plan. It's been said that most people in our world are being crucified between 2 thieves: the regrets of yesterday and the worries of tomorrow. That's why they can't enjoy today. Relying on modern means of transportation and communication, we try to live 2 or 3 days at a time, only to run headlong against the creation cycle of the universe, and the results are painful and often disastrous. Distracted driving. 10 years ago, there was no such thing. Put your hands at 11 and 1. You drove down the road and you kept your eyes on the person and kept your eyes on the other people because they were all dumber than you. And they were going to do something stupid and you need to figure out a way out of their way. Now I see people that are driving with their feet, putting on makeup that they get from Candy Early, with a cell phone on their ear like this, putting on their eyeliner, steering with their elbow, having a conversation, and driving 80 miles an hour. Right? You relate? On 280. Right. This is the reason why people can't enjoy today. Crucified between two thieves. We know that picture of the 3 crosses. The regrets of yesterday and the worries about tomorrow. You're not promised your next breath. Why are you worried about 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, or a year from now? I'll tell you, I went for my physical. It's kind of a funny story. And part of your Medicare physical, they have to check and see whether or not you're losing your mind. So you're sitting with the doctor and he's talking to you about your vital statistics and telling you your blood pressure and all this stuff, and he says, I'm going to tell you 3 words, I'm going to say 3 words, and later on in the conversation I'm going to ask you to repeat back those 3 words. I said, okay. So he said, here's the 3 words, later on I'll ask you about it. So 5 minutes goes by, he's done, and he said, what are the 3 words? I said, they're the same ones you asked me last year. He said, really? I said, yeah. I said, maybe next year you'll get some new words because I'm tired of holding on to what you told me last year. He said, I guess your memory is still intact. I'm not worried. I don't clutter my mind with worry. All right? Some people say, well, I speak too boldly. Would you rather me speak less boldly and watch you fall into a pit of sin or despair or suffer, walk into a situation that I know is only going to bring harm to you and your family, but you want me to be softened? Sorry, not going to happen. And your desire for me to change means you're in opposition to God's will because He's the one that made me this way. So you better figure out a way to see me through His eyes, all right? Because He's not changed me. And some of you have been under my teaching for 9 and 10 years, and I'm just as bold and just as outspoken as I was 9 or 10 years ago. And they try to put a gag on me, and guess what? The only thing it did was birth a worldwide television station so I can get in the face of everybody around the world. We looked to see if we could register the website inyourface.com. We thought that'd be perfect. But rely on modern means of transportation. We try to live life 2 and 3 days ahead of time. A famous Chinese scholar came to America to lecture, and during the course of his tour was met at a busy metropolitan railway station by his university host. If we run quickly, we can catch the next train and save ourselves 3 minutes, said the host. The scholar quietly asked, and what significant things shall we do with the 3 minutes that we save by running? You're speeding down the highway. Where are you going? It's so important that you put your life and the life of another at risk. And if you can't tell me right now why you were going 80 miles an hour, cutting people off on the highway getting over here, if you can't tell me in 3 months from now what was so important that you were in a hurry today, then it didn't matter. And if you can't tell me a year from now, and this has to do with the arguments you have, the bickering and the quarrels and the disagreements you have, if a week from now you can't remember the details of that quarrel and that argument, then that argument did not matter. What difference does it make who wins? And if you can't look back a year from now and it wasn't that big a decision, you can't even remember what the fight was about, then it did not matter. And I can assure you that I've met very few couples. Well, we're not getting along. Well, tell me what your last argument was about. And this one says, well, it was about this, and this one says, no, it wasn't, it was about this. So you can't even agree on what the last argument you had on. That's how important the issue was, is that you're not even on the same page of what was important. I want all of you to go home tonight and look up on YouTube, Girl with the Nail in Her Head. There's a video, it's 1.5 minutes long. Okay? It's called It's Not About the Nail. I want you to go online on YouTube and look it up. It's not about the nail. And I want to tell you that it represents every marital, premarital, and postmarital counseling session I have ever had with any couple. And you will understand exactly how ridiculous and foolish man is. Because the scholar says, and what will you do with the 3 minutes that you saved by running? A good question that could not be answered.